Welcome into the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me today, Fox 40, Sean Cunningham. Sean, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing quite well. I can't believe we're actually doing a show. It's been a while. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since we've done this show, and I feel like I've seen plenty of you guys over the past few days. So, to see staring right at James and Brenden, and finally doing this show, good to be here.
Sean's acting like we haven't done a show in like a month. What's
It's been a
going?
while.
Okay, so joining us as well, Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, how are you?
What's going on, guys? I'm doing all right. We just had a lot going on in a short amount of time.
That's true.
Yeah, I think it's wild. Like we're trying to, like all of us have other jobs, all of us are doing all these things, but at the same time, like finding a day where everyone can free up, an hour and a half block is usually pretty difficult for us, especially scheduling out. It's just like nearly impossible. Well, welcome in. Of course, we are the Kings Beat podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. We're also a Blue Wire podcast, so thanks for joining us. Prize Picks, I think I'm done for the season, so I'm not going to be putting out my Prize Picks anymore. Now I'm just going to focus on winning Prize Picks as opposed to just putting stuff out there that is usually me not playing all that well. But the good thing about Prize Picks is it doesn't end with the Sacramento Kings season. You've got playoff basketball, you've got baseball. I know my friend Kyle over at on the Insiders on ESPN 1320 loves to pick out pitchers who may or may not give up a run in the first inning as some of his prize picks. To me, that's crazy, but so be it. I'm wondering too if you can make a wager on the NFL draft, which is coming up. So all kinds of stuff going on at Prize Picks. It's really cool. If you want to give it a shot, go to Prize Picks. There's a link in the description down below and use the code KINGSBEAT, and they'll match up to $100 on your first buy-in. So welcome into the show. We've got tons to talk about. If you are watching here on YouTube, we love it if you give us a thumbs up. I don't think I can make the. Oh, I did make the thumbs up. I don't know why it works here. It's bizarre. It doesn't work anywhere else when I do the thumbs up. Make sure to give us a rating and review wherever you're listening to podcasts. Make sure to subscribe to the channel here, and also to jump on board with the Kings Beat. We don't shut down because the Kings are bounced from the postseason. We keep going, and we'll be trudging all through the summer with free agency, with the NBA draft, with things like Summer League and the California Classic. So welcome in, guys. What's going on?
I just told James a second ago that since we recording this right around lunchtime, should I say the name of the place I had the sandwich from? Because I'm a big
Sure,
fan.
that's fine. Yeah, it's fine. I don't care.
Beach Hut Deli, if you're listening, I love you.
You and hey, Beach Hut Deli, become a sponsor of the show. Like, jump on board here with the Kings Beat. Brenden and I have gone to Beach Hut Deli together.
It's true. There's the one right across from the stadium where they put up the ice rink. It's definitely a place to go before game, practice, whatever. So it was a good sandwich. I thought the story was going to go a different way.
No, it's just it was very much needed, and I reminded myself why I like Beach Hut Deli so much. I haven't been there in a while.
I'm one of those people who, like, for the most part, I don't even have time to eat a lot of the time. I'm just running from one place to the next and one situation to the next. So, like, I am now wanting a Beach Hut Deli sandwich. I blame Sean Cunningham for this. Okay, so we've had, since last time we spoke, we've had the play-in games. The Kings, of course, have been bounced from the 2024 NBA postseason. They did not make the playoffs. We've got all kinds of things that are going to go with that. Yeah, no. Are you guys doing podcast candles today?
I can't.
What is happening? I feel like we're out of sync. What is going on?
Because we're out of practice. We haven't done this in a while, guys.
I bet it hasn't been that long, Sean. It's been like 7 days.
Your voice went up.
Watermelon lemonade.
Oh, that sounds good. I bet you that smells nice. What do we got? 1,000 Wishes? That just doesn't make any sense.
That's a really good one.
That's a really good one.
I know why I didn't
Well,
have
these
it. 'Cause
two
I have
nut
the
balls light
freaking lighter over here.
their candles. So again, Sacramento Kings have been bounced from the postseason. I think that there's a lot to take in, and I think we could skim over really quickly the win over the Golden State Warriors are probably top 3 or 4 most complete games of the season by the Sacramento Kings, where they came out and throttled somebody and looked like the most dominant team. And then they ran into the buzzsaw that is the New Orleans Pelicans. For some reason, the Kings can't figure out a way to beat that team and are 0-6, finish the season 0-6 against one team. That's bizarre. And it's almost like a 3-year losing streak to a team all wrapped in one. Um, is there any takeaways you guys have just before we get started on everything else that's transpired? But any takeaways you guys have from the two playing games, other than one was really good and the other one was like almost to be expected?
I mean, for the most part, I was pretty encouraged by the Kings defense. They held the Warriors to 94 in that game. And the game against the Pelicans, they had been averaging over 120. I want to say over 125 in the 5 games prior, and they put up 105. It was just the Kings couldn't really score. And I think that we've seen them run into that issue since Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter went down to end the year. I think that it probably could have been a different story, I guess I'll say, if those guys would have been out there. But for the most part, I thought the defense was actually pretty encouraging. And really, if you look at that Warriors game specifically, the aggressiveness of Keegan Murray, I think that you can take those positives at least going into the offseason from those games.
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, the Warriors game, I think they proved a little something to themselves. I think they were super ready for the moment. I think the Warriors, they had a lot of people fooled with the way that they had closed out the season and how well they had been playing, and then they get absolutely blitzed from the moment that game started. And I thought it was a game that the Kings, obviously, I mean, both teams needed to have it, but I think the Kings needed to have a game like that, because let's face it, there's been some clunkers, especially in the time of these injuries, and closing out games and holding on to leads, all these things that we've documented over the past season have a problem. So to have a game where Keegan Murray goes off and just hoists threes and is super aggressive on the offensive end, and as Brenden mentioned, the defense was fantastic, but you also held off a little bit of a run that they tried to make in the third quarter, to eat into that lead a little bit, and then you really doubled down and was able to take that lead to 20 by a certain point in the fourth quarter. So watching the Warriors kind of crumble in that way, it reminded me, and I don't want to compare the two because obviously Dallas at the time wasn't a dynasty, like the Warriors are, and again, this wasn't a 7-game series. It was a 1-game one-off, but it felt like the finality of something, and it felt like a huge a hurdle that the Kings had been able to really overcome, this obstacle that had been standing in their way. I don't want to dramatize it much more than that, but I do feel it's worth acknowledging the accomplishment. And I think it did mean something to this group, even if it was a 1-game situation, because obviously, the Warriors have a big luxury tax bill, and yet they feel like they're on the other end already, and feel like it's kind of a conclusion. And who knows what the offseason brings for them. Whereas the Kings are in this really weird situation. They go on to lose the Pelicans, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But they're in this weird space where what your core looks like, what you have to add. You kind of, do you have the ability to do it? You have free agents you'd like to keep, but ultimately you're still kind of in this upswing, I think. And whether you've plateaued with this group could be a conversation to be had. But I thought that the week in general of beating the Warriors and getting over that hurdle, going into the Pelicans, who's had some more ownership of you, going into those 2 games, it kind of felt like, I made the thing on TV where it was like, Taylor Swift just put out an album, and this kind of felt like the revenge era for the Kings, like if they were able to overcome it. And certainly they weren't, with the loss, obviously, in New Orleans, but they were trying to overcome a lot of adversity and right the ship, because they stumbled into the postseason play-in tournament. And I still feel they would have been a tough out for a Thunder team in a playoff series, especially if they were able to get Malik Monk back. But I feel like any reservations the front office had about wanting to see this group in a playoff series, wanting to see what this group was capable of in running it back, I still feel like they've got enough answers to go into this offseason and really kind of stuck with the theme of the season. You can win a big game, this dramatic game, and then a game where sometimes you need to have it. This team who's just had this ownership over you just thumped you in the head, and didn't think that they would lose 6 straight to the Pelicans, but maybe we should have.
Yeah, maybe we should have. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like for me, the game against the Warriors, we had 2 young players just step up and just like excellence from both Keon Ellis and from Keegan Murray. And then you get to the next game against the Pelicans, and it really did feel like this is why they're young players. Young players can show up in one game and not show up in the next. And that's not something that they intend to do. But watching the hesitation of Keegan Murray against the Pelicans was unnerving. Like it was just watching him hold on to the ball, take dribbles that he didn't need to take. Just there was a shakiness to him. You could see it every time he stepped in to potentially take a three. It didn't even look like he wanted to. And it's tough because it was just a moment, and you felt like for whatever reason, the moment wasn't too big for him against the Warriors on Tuesday, but just a couple of days later it was. And to me, it was jarring to watch. And then Keon Ellis, for again, the Kings have done this throughout the year where something works really well and then they don't go back to it. I don't know why Keon Ellis he never even got an opportunity to really get anything going. And he goes 0 for 5 from the field. But realistically, I don't even remember him having like an open look and like being part of an offensive scheme. It's like they almost forgot him for the first like 24 minutes of the game. And just really, I think it was poor execution by the players on the court to not get everybody involved. And for whatever reason, I don't know what that was, whether Keon was standing around too much, whether he was caught up in the moment and wasn't moving. But either way, I thought that was 2 things that stood out was Keegan and Keon, both in the game, the win against the Warriors, and again the loss against the Pelicans. And this team isn't good enough to have 2 players who are in your top, 7 realistically. That's all Mike really played in both of those games. For them to be non-factors. And so that was like my early takeaways. But again, I'm going to write it off to number 1, a bad matchup. Number 2 young players who just kind of, struggle and that happens in a big moment. And I don't think it's anything to be down about. And like to watch the season end the way it did, I'm with Sean. I think that they would have given OKC a really good first round series. Whether they could have won or not, who knows? Whether Malik Monk would have ever made it back for that series or not, I don't know. But I definitely think that's something that we were all hoping for. Just so if it was Malik Monk's, final stretch in Sacramento, it didn't end like that, and we would have got to see him on the court. After that, so everyone knows what's going on. The Kings, what do we have? That was on Friday. On Monday morning, the Kings held exit interviews. They'll do the same thing.
Real quick before you go to the exit interviews. Sorry. Yeah. The one thing I want to add about, because I think that you have a really good point with the variance game to game in these play-ins for those young guys. But the one thing I want to add is that I think that that's why this is a good thing, is that they still are at this point in their process of their NBA career, and they have to go through these experiences to get better. Now, a full playoff experience would have been even more beneficial. But a big theme of this year was guys that, haven't dealt with the experience of having expectations after you performed really well in the year prior, and going through that entire year. Dealing with that was a form of growth for a lot of these guys. And the postseason experience of these play-in games was really big for Keegan and Keon. So just wanted to add that I think that that's what made this valuable. And I think that's the positives primarily that you can take from this season, because, I put out something saying that I thought this season was a step in the right direction. And People got on me for that. It's probably not the best wording, but more so think that it's not linear growth when it comes to the NBA. And there are a lot of things that I think internally core members of this team learned and were able to develop in this season that will still be really important down the line. And that includes those playing games.
Oh, I totally agree. I'd even say that the 10 games leading up to the play-in were incredibly important for those guys. I mean, I thought that like the experience for sure. This is what this team needs. I mean, they needed the 7-game series against OKC, but again, that could have gone 0-4 and they could have had a really negative experience. Either way, I get what you're saying, Brenden, and I do agree. Go ahead, Sean.
I can understand disappointment too with not only these players but from fans, particularly in this play-in game. And I kind of go back to what De'Aaron Fox talked about before the Warrior game, which was a bad shooting night from any team can end your season. And essentially that's what happened with the Pelicans game, because they had 2 large scoring droughts in that first half, and it felt like it was a 10-point game for the greater part of the game. And then every time it would get cut to 7, sometimes 6, it quickly became a 14, 15-point game again. But they seemed to be able to keep it right around 10 for the most part. It just felt like a little disappointing also, considering that they knew they didn't have Zion Williamson. You've got 2 days to prepare for this opponent as opposed to the other one, which was a really quick turnaround for the Warriors. And you had just seen them a week prior, less than a week ago, in a very, very crucial game. And to see that you've got 2 days to prepare for a Zionless Pelicans team that you just saw, felt wholeheartedly like we were I'm not saying that the Kings should have won that game, but I feel like us as an audience were kind of robbed from a better game experience. I really felt that game was going to be a highly contested game that would kind of go down to the wire, and really neither one of them were. Obviously one worked out for the Kings' favor, but it was a decided game. And I feel like even though the game was somewhat attainable and they made a run late, I never felt like from halftime on that the Kings were going to be a factor anymore in this game.
Yeah, and Sean, to that point, I think one of the most disappointing things about the Pelicans' loss was it wasn't so much Brandon Ingram, and it certainly wasn't CJ McCollum, and it wasn't even that much Valanciunas. It was all these other randos. You got beat by randos, and that to me was like the Kings didn't have a single rando like moment in that game. Like you saw Trey Lyles didn't have a big game. Again, Keon didn't have a big game. You got very little from Davion. Like there was a moment where Davion started to get things going. Alex Len was non-existent, and for me, that was kind of the weird feel to that. Like you shouldn't get beat in a game of that much importance by Najee Marshall and I don't know who was Larry Nance Jr. and who's the other guy? Oh, and Alvarado, right? They give up bench, dominated the Kings bench by so much, and it almost felt like the Kings were so hyper focused on slowing down CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram that they just completely forgot to scout to have a game plan for everybody else involved. You know what I'm saying?
Guys, everything was a dunk. They were so concerned about the perimeter that everything was a dunk. Yeah. That's why Valanciunas was so huge. That's why Larry Nance, who came in, and I didn't go back and count. I probably should, but I definitely don't have as many. I'm sure I don't have as many fingers as they had dunks in that game.
Yeah.
There definitely was a lot of that. And I think that's where you feel, definitely the lack of depth is part of this for sure. The injuries obviously playing a big part there, but I think the length is where this matchup really stands out. The length and athleticism that New Orleans has, and Sacramento hasn't really had that this year. When you're a help guy and you're running 3 guards out there, and the guy trying to help worry about the guy in the dunker spot is a guard trying to do something on Larry Nance. It makes a big difference than if you had more length out there. It's something the team has really struggled with not having, or not benefited from there being a lack of all year long.
Yeah, I have a question for you both. It just total spur of the moment. What do the Pelicans do? I know that's like, neither one of us were really prepared for that probably, but Like, what do you do if you're the Pelicans?
Like moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, I know they're still in a playoff series. We'll see how that plays out, and it's probably going to be a pretty entertaining one, especially after how game 1 went with the Thunder. But just what do you all think that they do? I mean, Trey Murphy is really good. Herb Jones is such a very good defender, decent perimeter shooter. They've kind of got like some question marks there as to who do they attach money to and who do they try to keep and what do things look like going forward for them. And I don't feel like I have a good read on what they should do or will do.
You probably hold on to hope of when all your guys are healthy that you're flirting with the top of the West. Like there's just not much flexibility really. And I feel like you kind of have to just maintain belief in the young guys.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, Sean, because like you can't rely on Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson. And I almost feel like if you were to dump either one of them or both of them, that team really wouldn't be that much different. Like honestly, I think Trey Murphy would step right in and fill Brandon Ingram's spot. I think that they've gotten so used to not playing with Zion that I don't think it would really matter. And like to be honest, like the rest of the pieces, they all play hard, and I don't know if it's just a confidence level against the Kings, but then you look at the record and the teams that they lose to, and the Kings are one of the lone teams in the Western Conference that lose to that team all the time. Like they don't have a bunch of like win percentages against all of or season series wins over a bunch of the teams they're competing with. So I always get confused by them. Is it just the Kings are like a shit matchup? Is that the problem or something like way more deep between? Because I'm with you, Sean. Like if they lose in this first round, they're kind of capped out on who they are and like with that group. And I think that they could take strides forward with some of the other players if they weren't there. Again, like if you were to go cash in on a Zion and try to get something, but I can't have a player go down in a win or go home matchup against the Lakers or win and have to play for a win or go home. I can't have a player go down with like what was it, 60 seconds, 90 seconds left in a game when he's dominated the whole game and just like something doesn't feel right. He said he didn't feel a tear. He didn't, like I'm just surprised at like some of the players that they're relying on can't be relied on at all. And I don't want to call a guy out for an injury, but at the same time, man, like, are you hurt or are you injured? And I guess we now know that he's more injured than he is hurt, but you couldn't have kept me off the floor in that final game against the Lakers at all. And that's where I think with me, I'm more of the, hey, I wouldn't blow the thing up, but I certainly would deal away with one of those guys because having the best ability is availability, and those dudes just aren't available when you need them at all the time.
So if I asked you guys, I'm going to give you 5 players, and none of them are free agents. So they're free agents of their main guys: Valanciunas, Cody Zeller, Najee Marshall. Those are the free agents. CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and I hesitate trying to throw in like somebody like even Larry Nance because it doesn't really it's rather insignificant. But let's just say those 4.
Or Dyson Daniels or
no, rather insignificant. I'm just saying of those main guys. Who's not on the team next year? Are all 4 of them on the team next year?
So Herb, well, you're thinking Herb, CJ, Brandon Ingram, Zion, and Trey Murphy.
Correct. Yeah, CJ, Zion, Brandon Ingram. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like
all 4. You think all 4 will be there?
I don't. All 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, and Trey Murphy is probably Trey Murphy or Ingram are kind of the 2 that I look at. Like Murphy is getting close to being due for an extension. I think he's a really, really good player and a starter in this league. And then BI's kind of in that same spot almost. And they can share the floor, but I feel like it's kind of picking between those 2.
I would be done with Zion. I can't rely on you. Like that's it.
I don't think they can though. They can't. In my opinion, they have to see it through for at least another season, maybe more. But to me, I feel like Herb Jones is going to be available. I think Brandon Ingram might be available.
I don't know that. Well, I mean, I don't think they have to make anyone available. I mean, they're probably going to lose Valanciunas. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know. If Valanciunas wants to play on a budget deal, I would take Valanciunas as my backup 5.
That dude's a
go
Bond
all
villain.
Lithuanian. All Lithuanian, just like straight up Lithuanian center. Okay, let's get into exit interview day. The way I described it today on the air with Kyle is, that meme of like the dudes going to a funeral, but they're dancing with the casket. You know what I'm talking about? Not the one where they drop the casket and whatever falls out, but the other one where it's like it's on their shoulder and everybody's dancing and having a good time. Is it just me or did it feel a lot like that? No.
What do you mean?
I mean, like,
you have to explain it.
That was a Malik.
I know the application.
That
I
was
know the application
from
of that. Yeah.
I mean, that was one guy after another, like speaking in such glowing terms about their former teammate Malik Monk. That's what it felt like, about how much he's meant to them and just how great of a dude he is, and how they wish, you don't wish anything bad upon him, but you understand it's a business. And like one guy, the only guy who's like, damn it, no, Malik is not going anywhere, is Domantas Sabonis. Everyone else, it just felt like, oh man, he's my best friend on the team. Every guy on the team is his best friend, just like speaks so glowingly, and it just felt like even when Malik stepped up, felt like he was about to cry the whole time. Is that just me? That's what I felt.
Well, I didn't think that it was a funeral for a friend or a funeral, where everyone was partying. I think everyone is very, very happy for Malik Monk, because no matter what, whether he's back or he's gone, it's going to. You have to understand. Like, I think some people look at this and go, why? Obviously, they want him on the team, but why are they, so happy to see him find success elsewhere? If that means it's because life comes first and foremost to basketball, and if Malik's path, he gets to control his own destiny. He hasn't always been able to do that. He's in a position where he's now the pretty girl at the dance, right? He's now the one that people want to get involved with and see how that goes. And it comes with a price tag for him, and he's for everything he's been through. And we've heard him talk several times since he's been here about his path and how, almost being out of the league. And that's true, and he had his best season in LA, and he followed that up with 2 of his best seasons of his career here in Sacramento. And he's been the good soldier. He's been a burr in the saddle at times for Mike Brown and for some of his teammates, but they know where that comes from, and it comes from a genuine place. And it definitely, they feed off of stuff like that. So I've always talked about him being, in my opinion, the most important player on that team. I think people realize it, and it's one of those things where it's a nice thing that he is, but he probably shouldn't be your most important player, and it can be a problem because you would hope maybe some of these other players, especially the ones that are more tapped into for long term, might be that type of player that everyone feeds off of and energizes off of. But no, it's Malik Monk, and they'd be thrilled to keep him, but they know that he's probably got greener pastures out there that can not only pay him more, but afford him the opportunity to start. And certainly he could start here in Sacramento if things work out a certain way, but the money wise is a little bit capped as to what they can do. So they're going to have to get somewhat creative, I think, in a way. James, those things more than I do. I think there's probably ways to see if it works, but ultimately it's going to be almost impossible, in my opinion, for him to remain in Sacramento.
Wow.
Brenden, what do you got? Of course, Brenden, just so you know, Sean was describing the plot of She's All That. That's like
the girl at the dance. Yeah, I just thought of how, like, in Charlotte, Malik was the dude outside of the dance being like, man, screw that dance. I didn't get the movie reference. But you mentioned, like,
imagine that. That's a shock, huh?
Yeah, shocker. But you mentioned like his perspective and his journey to almost being out of the league. He's also talked about when he became a free agent out of Charlotte, how really nobody was interested. And then it ended up
1.7 million. That's what he got. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And now he deserves to get paid. And it's going to be the most significant payday of his NBA career to date. And it's deserved. And the tone was definitely as if there was an understanding among the players that came out of the complications on Sacramento's end on what they can offer. And yeah, there was definitely he deserves a lot of money was kind of the theme I took. I guess my question to you guys, of course, nobody is having conversations that are not supposed to be had at this point, but how much of it do you feel like is not already figured out, but an idea of what these other offers are looking like, because I hear some of these conversations and yes, I'm reading between the lines a little of like, man, does Fox know something? Who knows what, blah, blah, blah. How much do you feel like people have an idea of what this market's going to look like right now?
Let's just say that you're Jeff Schwartz's agent, right? And you have another player on like the Orlando Magic, and that team calls you to talk about that player that's on the Magic. But in that general conversation, there could come up like, well, you have some other clients. What do you think like some of your other clients might be looking at this summer? Those conversations happen. Whether it's full-fledged like negotiation or whatever. Like there's a general understanding of what Malik Monk is worth in the league. And I don't know what that number is, to be honest with you. I don't know if like it's going to be a 4-year, $25 million deal or a 4-year, $100 million deal, $25 million a year. I don't know if it'll go up to like 120. I don't know what the bidding is going to be on Malik Monk, but the fact is the Kings, the only thing they can offer is a 4-year, $78.4 million deal. And it can opt out after 2 years. So realistically, it's more like a 2-year, $36 million deal with an insurance policy on the back end for Monk of the 2 years in case something bad were to happen. And then you could renegotiate and sign him to a longer term deal. He's only 26 years old. I would expect, he's going to play at a high level for another 8 years. So there's no reason to like for him to panic and go take like the most money that he could possibly take when the difference could be going to a bad situation, which he talked about yesterday. He said, I can make a whole lot more money, but go to a much worse situation. And he doesn't want to do that. But like just the semantics of it, there's no way for the Kings to get like low enough under the cap in order to sign him. And so he's at like the Kings are at 152 million bucks roughly in salary cap. The salary cap for next season it is at like 141 million, and the 152 is without Malik. Right. So if they were to sign Malik to again the starting salary at like 17.4 million bucks, that would put them at like 168. And they can make adjustments and they can, trade players and do other things to get lower on the cap. But if the Kings were trying to sign Monk for more than the 17.4 million, they'd have to go into like true cap space, which means they would have to get so far under the $41 million cap that after all of their exceptions for minimum players and all that stuff were gone, that they would have enough to offer Malik. So if you need to get like to the $25 million mark for Malik, that means you'd have to go from 152 down to 141 and then clear another 25 million. And then it's probably even more than that, like another 5 million on top of that, because you're going to have minimum scale contracts to get up to the minimum. So that, let's just say they'd have to go 25 million under the 141. So that puts us at what, 116? And then on top of that, they're going to have to shave like another 5 or 6 million. So let's say they'd have to get to 110 million. So if anyone out there knows a way for them to shave like 142 million, I mean, shave 42 million off the books, we can start talking about that. Like, could you trade Kevin Huerter for nothing to a team with cap space? Yes. Could you trade Harrison Barnes to a team with nothing for cap space? Yes, you could do that. So right there, that's about 36 million bucks. Now we're going to have to come up with like another 6 million bucks. So trade Chris Duarte, give up a second-round pick, trade Chris Duarte to a team that will take him into pure cap space. Okay, you got there. But number one, now you only have Malik Monk. You don't have any trade assets at all because Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter are gone. And whether you think of them as true trade assets or even as salary cap assets, all of that's gone. So basically, you have Malik Monk back, but a much worse team than you had the year before. And that's just the reality facing the Kings. And so I hope that sort of like answered that as much as possible. There's no way for the Kings to get into true cap space. And I'm going to throw the caveat here. In order to do all of that, they have to basically rescind their mid-level exception and their biannual exception in order to clear all that space. Right. So you, as of right now, if they were to sign Malik Monk to that 17.4 million, they still have a biannual exception at 5 million something and a mid-level exception at 12 million and could go and add to this roster. They'd have to go above the luxury tax, but you can go above the luxury tax and then try to find a way to whittle it back down by, again, you have $6 million contracts of Davion Mitchell, of Chris Duarte, an $8 million contract to Trey Lyles that are all expiring. You could find a way to get back down lower and to get, closer to the luxury tax or lower than the cap, lower than the luxury tax. But if you sign Monk, you would still have, first of all, your first round pick. And then on top of that, this whole other thing, which is your mid-level, the ability to go sign another $12 million player, which in this market is still going to be close to a starter or a really strong rotational player. Is that too much? Do you guys understand all that?
I think you covered it. Yeah.
Doing our best to keep up.
Do I need to whiteboard this thing? Do I need to whiteboard this thing? Yeah, it's just
pretty much. They're maxed at 478. It's going to be, it'd be practically impossible, I guess unlikely, if that's the wording you want to use, for one of these. There's not many teams with cap space, but for one of those to be willing to take on a Huerter or HB, and also just all the extra stuff that comes with it that you mentioned, it's pretty much 478 for Malik.
James, also, what if it was a 1-year deal? I know it's at 17.
So that's a problem, Sean. It's a good question. So the way the early bird works is it's not something that it's not a go around to try to circumvent the Larry Bird clause in the NBA salary cap in the CBA, right? So basically, a Larry Bird clause is if you have a player, whether you acquired his rights like during the middle of a contract, or you signed him to a free agent deal, or he's your own free agent, right? So if they're with your team for 3 years, or again, if they came to you, let's say a player's on a 4-year deal, he gets traded in year 2 to the Kings. Well, those 2 years still count as part of these years of service for your Larry Bird rights, right? So once you get to the end of the deal, you have the ability, a team has the ability to sign you for any amount up to your years of service in the league. So again, Malik could, if he had his Larry Bird rights, he could get the same exact money that De'Aaron Fox got. But he doesn't, because he signed a 2-year deal with the Kings. And so he's only eligible for the early bird, and the early bird has to be for a minimum of 2 years. So they can sign him to a contract. Again, here's, if you're Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox and Vivek Ranadive sitting in the room, you would say something to the effect of, hey, Malik, we'll give you a 4-year deal, but we'll have a player opt out after 2. If you want to leave after 2, that's fine. But we'll renegotiate and give you a much larger salary after 2 years when we have your full Larry Bird rights. And so that's one way they could do it. Another way is that they could waive their rights to Malik and then re-sign him to a free agent deal that, like almost like you could use one of your other exceptions to sign him to a deal, and then or a minimum, like an average player salary, and then get him his 3rd year, but he would have to take like 10 million with no assurances on the back end, if you got me. And that's not something that would be wise for Malik either.
No.
Yeah. So the best way for him to get his bird rights is to play out 2 more years in Sacramento and then go and then get a longer term deal.
If the Kings didn't have these restrictions, what do you think we'd be pitching as a reasonable contract for Malik right now? Because I don't feel like 20 mil a year, close to, is that far off, if at all.
I don't know. I've asked myself actually that a lot over the past, and to talk to a few people, and it's kind of all over the board. But I think you're definitely in the low 20 and possibly mid. You might even be able to front load, depending upon how you work the contract. I don't know. I think it just depends on who you ask. If it's me, I'd be comfortable with it, but
what, 425? Well, 4,100? Is that what we're talking?
Yeah, I mean, almost, to be honest, somebody thought the Buddy Hield deal had come up in terms of
486
conversation, where there's some incentives, obviously, but if there was a way to front load and do what you do, I don't know.
I mean,
Schwartz is a pretty shrewd agent.
Jordan Clarkson just got a 2-year 28
right
last offseason. Bogdanovich got 468. I know that he's had some injury stuff there.
But both are older.
Know. Yeah, they are. There's upside there for Malik. There's still just a lot of inconsistencies, that come with Malik Monk. And he had a comment yesterday about how he doesn't feel like, paraphrasing here, but he doesn't feel like Mike necessarily brought additional things to his game, but more so allowed him to show it, gave him more opportunities to expand it. And I'm just curious, if he got an expanded opportunity based on what we already saw, if those inconsistencies would hurt you a bit more. There's still a lot of question marks with Malik. And when he plays great, he looks phenomenal. He's definitely one of the more important pieces on the Kings, which is what makes it so crucial from their perspective. But in just vast terms of the NBA, I don't know. I feel like the 20 range is kind of about right for his inconsistencies.
I don't disagree with you, man. There's some things with Malik, and look, he's done it 1 year off the bench. Last year he was a good player. He averaged 13.5 points per game, but you can look at his points per game, his field goal percentage and his 3-point percentage both have gone down as his minutes have gone up. And I would even say the year before, when he was with the Lakers, he averaged more points per game than he did last season with the Kings. And that's playing off ball with LeBron James. And so I'm kind of the opinion that you're probably onto something, Brenden, that it might not be like, if someone wants to give him 25 a year, that's fine. I'd also throw this out too. It's well, I don't know if I should, because it's another intricacy to the salary cap that's frustrating, especially in this situation. But when the Kings signed, here, I'll be really quick with this. When the Kings signed Malik, what they did is very specific. There's a mid-level exception, and that year the mid-level exception was like $10.6 million, right? But in order to, you can break the mid-level up into multiple contracts, right? So just keep that in mind. You can just say it's 10.6. You could split it down the middle and go 5.8, 5.8, and split it to 2 players. There's also this thing about when you have second round picks, okay, in order to give, before last season, which is the Colby Jones deal, right? Colby Jones is a new exception for second round picks. And basically you can give a second round pick now the equivalent of what you would have given a first round pick. You give him a 2-year deal with a 3rd and 4th year team option, right? Well, that didn't exist the year before, which plays heavily into why this conversation goes this way. The Kings, what they'd done with the Malik Monk contract was they carved out a $1.6 million minimum contract out of the deal. And they did this very specifically. So again, 10.6, they carved out 1.6, and Malik got whatever. And it ended up being like 9.4, 9.5, whatever it is. They did this so they could sign Sasha Vezenkov. And again, the reason why they have to carve out this little piece out of the mid-level is because a standard second-year deal, you can only give before this season, you could only give a 2-year contract to, and then the guy's a free agent. So they wanted to give Sasha more years. If you carve out that piece out of the mid-level can be up to 4 years. So they were offering Sasha like a 3 or a 4-year deal, beginning with a 1.6 something million and going up in contract. Well, Sasha turned it down, and they could just go back and tuck the money into Malik's contract. But it actually comes to it plays out this way, because if Malik would have got that contract, the beginning salary that they could offer him right now is 19 million and goes all the way up to 24 million. And it looks more like the Buddy Hield contract. It's the 4-year, $86 million deal. And so it was like this weird thing that the Kings try to do to get Sasha to come over, which didn't work. But in doing so, again, Malik can only be offered this season by the Kings 175% of his previous salary. His previous salary is 9.9 million this year. It would be 11 million if they hadn't done this before, or 11.4 million if they hadn't done it before. And so they could have gone much higher with the deal. Not much higher, but we're talking about a starting salary of like 1.6 or $2 million more. That is, it goes up by 8% every year. It is quite a bit of money. And so just kind of an interesting add-on to all the other complicated discussion that we've had.
If this were baseball, he'd have a hell of an arbitration hearing.
Yes. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I guess if Malik does walk, well, I'm going to say this before I skip to that. Was there anything that anyone said about this situation that like stuck out to you? Because every player talked about Malik.
Every player was asked about Malik, except for De'Aaron Fox. Did you notice that? That was wild.
Well, because De'Aaron had answered like a couple of days before.
But I also feel like he did it in the heat of our season just ended, and I was rather perplexed. He was up there for 14 minutes and nobody asked about Malik. Now, someone might be listening to this, Sean, why the hell didn't you ask? I did ask some questions, but that was a pretty packed house for the part where De'Aaron spoke for almost 15 minutes, and I was just shocked that nobody asked. I thought for sure it would come up.
Yeah, I thought interesting. I actually had not noticed that. I don't know. I mean, stood out that, like James said earlier, Domas was really the one to be like, Malik, we need Malik back 100%. And everybody else kind of took the perspective of, he's got to go get his money. And so whatever that may end up meaning. And I thought that Malik pointing out, I could go get more money on a worse team was interesting to me. And part of the reason I kind of posed that question of how much do you feel like is known at this point to you guys earlier. And the starting thing too, I mean, it's nothing new, but Malik just kind of doubling down, tripling down, however many times on he definitely wants to be in that starting spot. And it is an interesting exercise to look at some of these other teams and wonder if they wouldn't prefer him as a 6-man too. But it's an interesting wrinkle that was kind of already known, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm glad you brought that up, because I did see people talking about that, and it's every player wants to start.
Right.
Like nobody's like, I really want to be a bench player.
Because he follows it up with like, but I'll play my role.
Right. He's going to do what's best for the team, and ultimately it's part of what makes him so unique. It's kind of like, I know a lot of people in Sacramento like to talk about Bobby Jackson in that way, always pushing Mike Bibby, and a lot of times getting probably more contribution off the bench, or even playing with a more kind of a consistency off the bench than as a starter. But it's just the role he knows. It's the role he played. When he was in LA, he still started over 30 games because he had
37.
to. Yeah, I mean, he was decent. I mean, that's what got him the contract here in Sacramento. But my thing's always been, as long, I don't care what Malik Monk does on the floor, because it all has such a positive impact on his team, except for when he turns the ball over. When he turns the ball over, that's what automatically just brings the team down. And so as long as he doesn't turn the ball over, I don't care if he's missing shots. I don't care about any of that. Just don't turn the ball over.
Yeah, I would say too that there was a season when Mike Bibby, I think, broke his wrist. You brought up Bobby Jackson, that's why I'm bringing this up. I think it's a 2002, 2003 season when Bibby he only played 55 games. He broke a bone in his hand or in his wrist, and Bobby Jackson started 26 games. But initially, that's not what they did. They slid someone else into the starting lineup, and they did that intentionally to because they liked having him off the bench. They liked having Bobby Jackson off the bench. And to me, that's okay. Like I don't have any problems with that. Like uh, for me, I guess this is the next logical question though. If Malik said to Monty and Mike and Wes, if you give me the starting job, I'll take the 78 million. Are you doing it?
Well, before I answer that question, I think it's important to. I don't think Malik Monk would put them in that type of position.
He just did. He told us yesterday.
No. Again, if you're listening,
Yeah.
he wants to start. Absolutely. Just like any player wants to start. But he recognizes he will do what's in the best interest of the team. And if in the best interest of the team is the role that he plays to come off the bench, he'll be okay with that. He'll want to be the sixth man of the year or the best reserve player there is in the game. But the flip side of that is no, I would like to start. And so that means to me, like, if Sacramento's on the table and I don't think Malik will look at his situation with Sacramento and say, make me the starter. Like, that's part of the negotiation, right? I think he will still do what's best for the team. Like, I think he will recognize if this team comes back as currently constructed, he will recognize his best impact on this team is still in that reserve role, unless Kevin Huerter's gone or however they tinker with the starting rotation. But I still think ultimately they'll determine that would be in his own best interest to come off the bench. Now, looking at a team like Detroit, where maybe putting him alongside Cade Cunningham or whatever and being that number two, that would be fine for that particular situation. Meaning that him being on the bench doesn't necessarily lead to the best impact for the team. In that regard, he'd probably have better impact in the starting rotation. You could make an argument when it comes to Orlando, like how do you look at their situation? Jalen Suggs is a hell of a player who obviously is a defensive player of the year candidate, or at least in the defensive team category, probably will be on the all defensive team. How do you look at that? Wagner, all those guys. So yeah, it's interesting. But I think with Sacramento, I just can't picture Malik Monk and his agent sitting down and going, you have to name my guy the starter. I just can't see him putting himself in that position if it's not truly in the best interest of the team.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wish I asked him yesterday because I feel like closing games is really like the thing.
Right.
And Malik does that. Yep. Now, I get that everybody or a lot of guys have in their mind, this image of themselves being a starter, getting to be out there at tip, and just that's part of the dream in a way for a lot of people. But I don't know. I think being on the floor at the end of games, and from Sacramento's perspective, if you go into next year and say Kevin Huerter wasn't there and it was some forward that you traded for, like, I still might prefer Keon Ellis in that starting lineup over Malik Monk. I think that if it came to the point where he was demanding that, and I'm with Sean, I'd be surprised if it got to that point. I guess you have to say yes, but I mean, it's to each his own. I personally don't think it should really matter, but I get it.
Okay, here's the other question. If you're the Kings,
you didn't answer your own question. Where did you land on it?
I'm going to ask. I'll answer it, but I'll answer it after I throw the wrinkle. What if the Kings come to him and say, "Look, all we can offer you is $78.4 million, but we'll also offer you a starting job." If you're the Kings, do you do that?
I don't know.
It's a different
I don't know. I mean,
perspective.
again, yeah, it is. I mean, because again, like, let's play a game, okay? It's a 4-year deal. Mike Brown might not be there in year 3.
We haven't even got to that situation.
It's a whole other thing.
What does your team look like in year 2 of that deal? So again, like I don't think the Kings can do that. I don't think it's wise business sense for them to do that. Now, I would say, look, we would like to give you every opportunity to start, something to those effect. But I mean, giving a guy a guarantee, like, no, I just don't. I don't see it. Am I wrong?
I guess that you pitch it. You know, I mean, you're in a tough spot if he walks, is what it comes down to. It's very hard to replace his production. There's whatever could happen with this 13th best odds, whether that's getting rid of the protections and freeing up more picks to do a trade, or if you're taking a guy with wherever that pick ends up, or there's the MLE. But it's all very difficult. Ideally, you have those and Malik Monk, and that's how you're continuing to trend in the right direction. So you're almost in a spot where, I don't know if desperation is in the right word, but your back's against the wall. So if it helps, I guess.
I'll even say this. I'll even say this. If you're Malik Monk and let's say the Kings come at you with that, let's just hypothetical. If you're taking that offer, you're putting it in your back pocket and you're waiting to see if anybody offers you north of $25 million per year. If you get a Jordan Clarkson deal somewhere, something like that, whatever. And then you have a decision to make.
What did Clarkson
I wonder,
get?
Was it 28, you said?
Yeah, I can
a year?
Again.
I thought it was a 228.
No, yeah, it's 228.
Yeah.
So not 256, 228.
Yeah, right. 228.
Got it. Okay.
And this was the first year it started. He had just signed that.
Okay. This is all. I mean, it's complicated. I think that's at the end of the day, it's complicated. And I don't know how it works out. If I'm the Kings, I would consider offering him because at this point, like, look, I don't think anyone would be surprised if Kevin Huerter was not the starting shooting guard on the Sacramento Kings to open the 24-25 season. So, and while Keon Ellis is up and coming, and Keon Ellis is up and coming, and everything else. I'm surprised you didn't use a black Sharpie and put on the sleeve.
The sleeve,
the sling. Yeah, right there.
He was much nicer to the likeness of that than I would have been.
The buck teeth.
What do we? Yeah, that's just so weird that he doesn't
bobblehead for the audio side. Sorry to sidetrack us.
That's tough for our guy Kevin. Look, my point would be, hey, look, Keon Ellis could be a starter in this league, and I think that opening next season, he probably is my starter as of right now. But if I've got to give Malik Monk that job, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd say this: if you're going to lose Malik, I think your offseason changes dramatically because now I think you have to go chase a frontline starter shooting guard. Like, I think you need to balance that position more. You need a guy who can stand in alongside De'Aaron Fox and give you, 16 to 20 points a game, and like is a good defender and all that stuff. I think it really does change your entire offseason, and then use Keon Ellis as your backup to the 1, the 2, the 3, whatever you want to use him as. But if not, I could definitely, if you have Malik, I could see Keon Ellis being the starter coming back, and then trying to improve the 2, the 3 or the 4, whichever one you can find, players to fill. That's trades via trade.
If that's the situation, and with respect to Davion, let's pretend he's still on the team, but whether he is or he isn't, even if he is, you're going to need some much needed playmaking.
No, I totally agree.
The 2, or even another point guard. So,
you'd probably be forced to look at Keegan a little bit. I feel like that's kind of what they did when those guys went down. And
but
it's still very early in the process, but that's kind of where you'd have to look, I feel like. And whatever guy you ideally.
Well, I say you look at it in whatever you bring in, be it trade or free agency, you have to go and find that.
Wow, we've taken this all over the board. We're not going to keep going all day long. We're going to do a lot more podcasts this summer about all of this information, but I think a lot of this is all fresh and new because we were sitting in a room with everyone talking about Malik so glowingly and what he means to the franchise and everything else. So That's why he is the biggest topic of discussion, because realistically, he was the topic of discussion during exit interviews. Was there anything else? Let's just kind of go around really quick. Is there anything else that stood out to you guys from those discussions that you just thought like struck a chord with you, whether it was when you were listening to it live or you went back to listen to it, or you're writing a story or creating something? But was there any other player who, outside of like JaVale McGee, says he has no interest in retiring, that like kind of stood out to you?
I thought Davion and Kevin were very open and honest about kind of mentally dealing with this season. You know, Davion reflecting on getting DNPs at the beginning of the year and talking about how that had never been a situation that he had really been in, and hearing Keon Ellis talk about how really essentially he took Davion's spot at a point in the year. And Keon said that Davion was still very vocal and helping him out throughout the process. So I appreciated Davion's transparency, and the same thing for Kevin, a very up and down year for him, talking about how this was probably his worst year as a pro, directly following what was probably his best year as a pro last season. And he's hoping to obviously bounce back a little bit next year. But I thought that those guys were very transparent in reflecting and kind of the mental obstacles that presented themselves this year for him.
Yeah, Kevin, I thought was incredibly interesting.
Forthright.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's even the way I posed a question to him. I was just so interested in the human dynamic of him, especially because of the psyche of a shooter, a guy who just knows, you know, your whole world exists, whether because you can shoot the ball, and when that's not falling, it's, boy, what a disruption. So yeah, interesting to see what he went through. But also, you know, it's not like they lit the world on fire when he was hurt. And I think if I'm him, I'm kind of keeping that in the back of my mind, knowing that, you know, hey, this team wasn't good because you weren't good. You know, you needed to be better. And can you imagine how bad that would have felt if like he had gone out and all of a sudden they rose to like some other level and just kind of caught some magic in a bottle, so to speak. I think that would have been, if you know, hard to internalize, to just me putting myself in his shoes. So I like that. And
Sean, on that point, I mean,
you're talking Keon Ellis. I mean, I get it. Yeah.
No. In a way, I think Malik Monk his injury bailed out Kevin, because I think that could have happened. And I think you're right. It probably would have had a larger impact on Kevin. But, you know, by losing Monk and Huerter,
right,
I think it took away so much of the offense that we never got to see it. But go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't even consider that, because I also look at Malik as so much of a playmaker anyway. But you're right. I mean, especially two shooters on that team for sure. But the other one for me was Sasha Vezenkov. I mean, I'm listening to him talk, and I'm like, boy, how did he not at any point in the year just go, did I make the right choice? And I had to ask him that direct question, and wish I had some more time with him to maybe explore some of the things he was talking about, because he said there were things that gave him doubts, but never did I make the right choice in coming to the NBA. And I thought that was certainly worth exploring. Obviously,
he said never did he make the wrong choice. It was the right choice to come to the NBA. That's
correct.
What he said.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there were obviously, you know, as he called them, doubts of other things and that would pop up, but ultimately would love to see what he views himself as. And obviously he wants a bigger role. And I think he's undeniably more confident and comfortable with the NBA game today than he was back in September when he landed in Sacramento. So, yeah, well, I think that's going to be it. I thought he was, if anyone hadn't heard his comments, I think seek those out, because they were pretty honest.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 things from me on this. Number 1, I thought it was really interesting when Kevin started talking about how he worked so hard all off season to be the DHO guy and to do the things that they did in their offense last season, that he got away from the basics. And that was a mistake, because when teams took that away, it threw him for a loop and he had nowhere to go. And so I thought that was really, really interesting to see Kevin like saying like, I kind of set myself up for failure inadvertently. by really trying to become so much better at something that was very specific, as opposed to becoming better as a basketball player like he usually does. And so I thought that that was really, really interesting. And then adding to your point with Sasha, everyone should go listen to Sasha because number one, he is one of the most eloquently spoken players I've ever been around, and he's absolutely insightful, and he's honest. And I followed up your question, Sean, with the question of how difficult it was to go from an MVP to a role player, and just seeing like the wheels turn in his head. Like that whole entire interview to me was like spectacular. All of us, like, we asked good questions of him, but also like he's just honest about things that you wouldn't expect him to be honest about, whether it was being really honest about Malik and how even when Malik got hurt and they were both hurt at the same time, like having that person to help you through some of it, or that like everyone wants to be famous and everyone wants to have everybody know their name and get the accolades, and going from an MVP to a role player, like, I don't know, 7,000 miles or 5,000 miles away from home, was like really difficult for him. But either way, I thought that that was really that whole entire conversation. Outside of that, I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that like caught my ear. Um, I don't know, Harrison. I thought Harrison's explanation of his up and down season was kind of enlightening in a weird way. I don't know if you guys like he struggled to figure out what his role was the whole year, even though he's a veteran, and that's because he was trying to be a good teammate and allow other people to have increased roles, and it kind of, I think, got to a point where he had lost himself. So I thought that that was some good stuff. Overall, I thought it was a good day. Like it was a
Domas
rapid fire. Go
Domas
ahead.
mentioned that he thinks like part of the process is taking a step back is an important part of taking a step forward. He seemed to have pretty good perspective on, I guess, the process of this season and what that means more long term for the state of the Kings. And Harrison also, I forget what the question was, but in response to um, pretty much acknowledged how valuable it is that this is still the same front office and coaching staff. And having that stability really gives him confidence for the continued growth and trajectory of this organization, which should probably remain the same.
Okay, so let's wrap up with those two things. Number one, if anyone missed it, Jordi Fernandez, the associate head coach and defensive coordinator for the Sacramento Kings, has left to take the Brooklyn Nets job officially. We don't have any word yet on any assistants that might go with him, but I, number one, wouldn't be surprised if one or two do. I also wouldn't be surprised if the Kings promote from within to that front of the bench position, and maybe reconfigure who is the quote unquote associate head coach, or if they need an associate head coach type deal. Do you, Sean, have you heard anything on who might go with him?
A little bit, but like nothing worth reporting. I mean, again,
Okay.
I would anticipate a member of the staff going with him though.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, there are a lot of members of that staff. So, I mean, I could see a guy like Leandro Barbosa looking at it as like a different opportunity. I could also, especially, I know Luke Laux is a guy who's probably, if he does not go, is probably going to move to the front of the bench, I would assume.
Yeah. I don't think Luke will go, but maybe a Lindsey Harding, perhaps something
Oh,
like that,
okay.
a possibility. But again, I don't want to speculate too much. I just feel like Jordy's going to try to bring somebody that he's obviously worked with. He's got already somebody set from Portland that's going to go with him, and yeah,
Okay.
he'll have plenty of time to round out his staff. And Mike Brown is about as I mean, his tree is up there with a lot of other coaches that have been in this game for a long, long time. So he's got a lot of people he can choose from. And yeah, if he's promoting from within, fantastic. If he's bringing in somebody, I think the one thing that could be difficult is getting his situation figured out a little bit first before if he's bringing in anybody from the outside.
Okay. Yeah, and I would also like Luke Laux again. I would expect moves up to the front of the bench, but also you have to look at Luke and Dolkey's as like those two are basically inseparable. Their wives were like best friends in college. They're friends from college. They have all these little babies that are around the same age, and I think they're more of like a group, a package deal if they were going to go anywhere, and I expect them to stay. But who knows? You never know. Let's see, and then the other question is, I'm sure you guys read the notes from Sam in his closing piece about Mike Brown. It sounds like he's got a 3-year deal with the Kings with a 4th-year team option, which means he would be walking into this coming season as a quote unquote lame duck coach. And he's looking for a new contract in a substantial bump in pay. I don't know what he makes right now, which is interesting because usually we figured that one out by now. But I have heard, like my own sources have told me that, like with the inflation of NBA coaching salaries, which began with Monty Williams signing that monstrous, what was it, like 6 years, $76 million deal or whatever. And then Greg Popovich and then Steve Kerr, like all these guys getting these massive deals.
Spoelstra,
what's that?
Eric Spoelstra as well.
Oh yeah, so like wrapping all this up, that Mike would be looking for a contract in the $10 to $12 million range, from what I've heard. I don't think that's unfair. I think that that's where coaching salaries are going, and I think that that Monty Williams did the NBA head coaches sort of a service here by taking a bad job, but he had to because the money was so great, and now it's open to like sort of Pandora's box for NBA head coaches. Where are you guys at with this one? Because this is going to be pretty crucial summer for the Kings, and I would hate to see them take a step backwards because they can't get on the same page about something like this.
I mean, Mike Brown has done, I think, everything you could have ever hoped. And I think he deserves to get paid. And I don't think it's really more complicated than that. I think that he's gotten some of the best basketball, or the best basketball up to this point we've seen out of De'Aaron Fox, had him embrace the defensive end of the floor. We've seen their relationship, the relationship that he has with Malik Monk, the way that he was able to get a good coaching staff around him that now is getting promoted to other head coaching positions around the league. I just feel like you can go on and on. I don't feel like there's people want to point at Mike's rotations. There were moments where he kind of had to search because there's unideal depth on this team. Like, I really don't feel like there's pretty much anything I can look at and be like, wow, Mike Brown really just didn't take care of business here. I feel like he's done everything you could have asked, and I feel like he deserves to get paid, and not doing that because progress hasn't been linear, I think could be a really, really big mistake.
Yeah, it's hard to pin anything negatively on Mike. I mean, he's had 2 seasons here, and he's had beyond a positive impact. And so if you're betting on continuity, your head coach is a part of that. So you tend to reward that head coach for the continuity. And certainly you can everything's expensive these days. I mean, everything's wildly expensive. So head coaches are finally getting paid.
Playoff tickets were real expensive too.
Yep. Well, postseason playoffs a year ago, and
they made people pay. They made people pay for a first round. And those tickets were expensive, and those play-in tickets were the highest priced play-in tickets in the NBA.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. And if he's not your guy, then for whatever reason, then it would be wild. It would stink of Michael Malone kind of vibes. But if he's not your guy, you better do it quick, right?
Well, guys, you do that, like, yeah, that's the first domino.
Here's Brenden.
That's ridiculous. I know you guys have seen some shit.
Mike is my
guys, that'd be insane. God.
If he's not your guy, you do it quick. I mean, that's just what you do. And I'm not insinuating anything here. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying that, like, if you're not comfortable in extending Mike Brown like this offseason, then you better fire him tomorrow, because what are you doing? Right? Then who are you comfortable in doing that with? Because your next head coach is going to cost you about just as much as Mike Brown is seeking in his extension. Right?
Well, I mean, they should be asking for that.
Unless it's a first-time head coach, like let's pretend they're not comfortable in extending Mike Brown, so they fire him tomorrow, and Jordi Fernandez doesn't have the Brooklyn Nets lined up. And if they like Jordi Fernandez and they promoted him as a first-time head coach, certainly it wouldn't cost what Mike Brown's experience would have gotten him in an extension based off the success he had over his 2 years in Sacramento. So
but I would also tell you, Jordy's not taking that job. Luke's not taking that. Like,
right,
there are guys that are Mike Brown guys that aren't taking that job. Yeah,
Mike Brown is not your Mark Jackson, and you don't need to go find a Steve Kerr.
Amen.
Well said.
That's a good way to wrap this thing up. What do you guys got for final thoughts?
Well, for my final thoughts, it's not really basketball related, but NFL draft is keeping me kind of busy. We've got a guy who's going to go very, very early on Thursday. Probably the best defensive player in the draft, Liatu Latu from Jesuit High School by way of UCLA. This dude is incredible. Had time to spend with him as he went back to Jesuit. What was it, last month? And he's going to be a lot of fun to watch in the league. And then there's some hopefuls from the area. A lot of people from hoping to hear their name called. Probably maybe won't, but it'll be always interesting to see where undrafted free agents sign. And there's two guys from Indercombe High School in Natomas, Isaiah Crocker and Trajan Cotton. One's a receiver in Crocker. Cotton was a safety, and both started one was at Oregon State, one was at Oregon, and then ended up these transfer portals are just as wild in the NFL or in the college football as they are in college basketball. So their way. And then Sac State's got a couple. I mean, their leading receiver last year was Carlos Hill. I don't know that he certainly won't get drafted, but maybe he finds an opportunity somewhere. And Marshall Martin, who's probably got the best opportunity out of any of those four guys I just mentioned. So it's going to be fun stuff. Keep your eye out. But Liatu Latu, watch out for him.
Sweet. Make sure to follow all of Sean stuff at Fox 40. Yeah. Brennan, what do you got for us?
I'm just wondering if this was the first episode where someone ate in the middle of the podcast.
No, I did that before.
Oh, okay.
Did you eat?
And I threw on mute and I had some.
The salary cap talk just got him really hungry.
Yeah, I was like, well, I'm not talking for a while, so let me grab some lettuce and take at it. Let's go.
I know that Kenny likes to eat on the show on D-Lo and Casey. He likes to eat his snacks. I'm like,
I can hear it usually.
We have the fortress of snackitude.
Yeah, hopefully it was good, Sean. But I'm excited for off-season content, weirdly. I do kind of enjoy this cycle of getting to look into free agent stuff. There's MLE. I get to now pretend or entertain myself with some draft stuff as well, with them having the 13th odds. A lot of optionality there, I guess we'll say, which I think makes for some fun when it comes to coverage. So I'm excited.
All right.
0.8
and that's something
chance of jumping up and to winning the lottery.
Yeah.
3% of top four. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's touch base on that really quick. The Kings won a coin flip, which I don't know if it's scientific enough as a coin flip, but they did win whatever mechanism they do to break ties. The Kings won. They have the 13th best odds to land the number 1 overall pick. And now the Golden State Warriors have the 14th best overall odds. If the Warriors don't move into the top 4, their pick goes to the Trailblazers, which is actually probably a good thing for the Kings that both of those things happen. Number 1, the Warriors won't have a pick, and number 2, the Trailblazers will have a pick that's behind them and not as good, even though the Trailblazers have their own pick, which is much higher. And then because they shared the same, so basically it's a 1% chance and a 0.5% chance. They cut that almost down the middle. The Kings have a 0.8, the Warriors have a 0.7, and moving up into the top 4 of the draft, something like that, right? So not likely, but does that change your guys' offseason, for this team, the 13th pick?
No. What do you mean?
It's not a great draft. Just so people know, it's not a great draft, but it also No, like for them, like would this change your mind about some of their offseason moves?
Absolutely not.
That's what I meant. Okay.
No.
Yeah, the 13th pick. The problem with this draft isn't so much the depth of the draft or like the quality. It's at the top end of the draft isn't good. There is no number one overall like surefire player. I don't think there's even anyone that somebody that people think is like a potential future all NBA or even all-star. There might be an all-star hiding in there that we don't know about yet, but like the top end of the draft isn't great. But that doesn't mean that there isn't depth throughout the draft. A lot of foreign-born players in this draft that are going to go in the top 15, and even quite a few like G League players, G League Ignite players that could go in the top 15. So it should be an interesting couple of weeks.
0.8% of first, 3.8 of top 4.
3. Oh, that's not okay. That's not good, but okay.
There's a chance.
And now the Kings, so just to wrap that up, the Kings 2025 pick and 26 pick are now tied up and they cannot be traded. The 27th pick can be traded, but with like an asterisk and a rider written in that if the 25th pick goes, and they could trade the 27th. If not, it would have to be a 28 pick.
But so you can trade your draft pick on draft day.
Well, technically, no. You can draft a player for someone else and trade them when the new NBA season starts on July 1st.
Right.
Yeah. So they could still trade they could trade their 2024 pick, but they have to do it on draft. Well, they have to do it. The trade can't officially go through until after the new season begins. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can draft somebody else for somebody like the Kings did with
just like last year with Dallas.
Jaden Hardy.
Yeah. Olivier Maxence. Yeah, Prosper. Yeah. So yeah, I would expect the Kings to be pretty active here. Cool. All right. I think that's gonna. Oh, let me see. Final thoughts from James. I don't really have any. I need a break. I think everyone here needs a break. This was a difficult season. It was difficult because it was all over the board and there was no linear growth. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking forward to a couple of weeks of a little bit less driving, a little more.
James just needs to move closer to Sacramento. I think that's what it is.
No way. No way. You kidding me?
Or just find a way to,
And I still have my radio show now. I still have to drive down every day. So I'll be in Roseville every day. Okay. Well, I think that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you're still watching, give us a thumbs up, give us a rating and review. Go to thekingsbeat.com, become a premium subscriber. I'm super close to actually landing a spot. No, I am for an off the record with the Kings Beat happy hour. Won't be a live show. I don't want to do a live show in that setting at first, but we definitely are going to get together and do a for premium subscribers. So jump on board with that. So I think that's going to do it. So for Fox 40, Sean Cunningham and Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast, I am James Ham, Kings Inside for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Thanks for tuning in.